Hi there, I'm Gordon Selassie, and this is Make It Legal. You're welcome to this video. Today we are continuing part 2 of our discussion on marriage. Today we are proposing the marriage validity checker. Is your ordinance marriage truly valid? Make it legal. When we talk about ordinance marriages in Ghana, they are often called Christian marriages as well. They are also called monogamous marriages. So if you are married under the ordinance, the simple question I ask you today is your ordinance marriage valid in law? You may say it's valid because you are doing all that people do in marriages. They give birth to children, they support each other, they engage in sexual activities. You're doing all of that. Because of that, you may say that your marriage is valid. But I want us to check it with the test of the law. If you have an ordinance marriage, is it really valid? I have few things that I think that you need to know. You need to use to measure the validity of a marriage. Number one, how was the marriage celebrated in the first place? What procedure was followed in celebrating that marriage? If it is an ordinance marriage, then the procedure prescribed by law must be followed. There are some key things that must certainly take place for an ordinance marriage to be valid in law. If those things did not take place for your marriage, then the check result is that you have an invalid marriage. And chances are that when problems come, the marriage will be nullified and it will be as though it never existed. So let me share with you about 6 of the things that I think should be present in all ordinance marriages. And I'll also share with you some of the things that should be present to make all Muhammadan marriages valid under the law. So let's start with the first one. Now, all ordinance marriages, before the marriage celebration even kicks in, you have to ensure that you publish the bans. And now, the publication of bans is one of the key requirements of the ordinance marriage. And it's not something you do, but you have to go and see a marriage officer or the registrar of marriages to give notice that you intend to marry under the ordinance. So you inform them that you want to marry under the ordinance. That's simply giving the notice. And they will note it in a register that is designed for that purpose. So they will note it there that Mr. A wants to marry Miss B and they intend to marry under the ordinance. So the marriage officer is under duty to publish the bans. The publication of bans is more like an announcement they make of your intention to get married. So the law requires that to be done for 21 days, usually 3 Sundays. So it should be such that your pastor in the church you fellowship, as well as the church the other partner also fellowships, they should announce it at a public divine service, a Sunday service. Either that takes place in the evening, in the morning, or in the afternoon. So it could be announced at Sunday services that are organized in the evening, or that are organized in the morning, or that is organized in the afternoon. Very important. So take note of that. It has to be published. Remember, it is 21 days. So for each Sunday, that'll be 3 Sundays, it has to be announced that you intend to marry this person. And they are informing the church so that they will be aware. If anyone has any reason why the two should not get married, they should step forward and say it, or they forever hold their peace. They forever remain quiet. So that's the first requirement. If this was not done for you, chances are that your marriage could be invalid at a point, because that is crucial. If bans is not published for people to be aware and raise any objection they may have, then chances are that your marriage is not valid. The next thing you need to note has to do with the second element that is required to make your ordinance marriage truly valid. That is about the certificate to celebrate the marriage. Now, after the publication of bans, the registrar of marriages or the marriage officer has to give you a certificate that you should go and celebrate the marriage. This certificate is often given to you to celebrate the marriage within 3 months after the publication of bans. So the day you are given the certificate, 3 months from that date, you are supposed to celebrate the marriage. In other words, you're supposed to have the wedding, or fulfill all the right to have the marriage concluded. If you don't do it within the 3 months, you have to go back and start the process all over. You have to go back and give notice, and you publish the bans they will issue the certificate. The process start afresh all over. So you have 3 months. One certificate is given to you to marry, and the marriage celebration must be done after the certificate is issued. You cannot marry unless certificate is given to you. We are talking about ordinance marriages here. The next one you need to note is that, which is the third one I have for you, is that the marriage must be celebrated by a licensed or recognized minister of religion. Now, this is very important. If the celebration was not done by a licensed minister or a recognized minister, it can make the marriage invalid. Remember, the celebration should not only be done by that person, but it should also be done between the hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. So you cannot, under Ghanaian law, validly have a marriage in the night unless it is under special license where they dispense of that requirement. So take note of that. The celebration of the marriage itself, which I told you earlier must be within the 3 month period after they have given you the license, should be done by a licensed or recognized minister of religion, and should be done within the hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. What it means is that if you have celebrated your marriage before 8 a.m. or after 6 p.m., you are not complying with the law. This is ordinance marriage I'm talking about. And chances are that it could be declared invalid sooner or later. You're also required to have at least 2 or more witnesses present. So the presence of witnesses is a key requirement in ordinance marriage. You not only have the officiating minister present, but 2 or more. Remember, it's 2 or more. So you can do your marriage and say that I'm going to only invite 5 people: my mom, my dad, my woman's mom and dad, and then one other friend. They will come and be witnesses together with the officiating minister. That gives you a good number to have the marriage. You don't need to invite other 1,000 or 100 people in town and feed all of them to have a valid marriage. So you need to know that the Lord doesn't give you so much pressure, except the one you give yourself. You know that? Okay, the next one you need to note is the place of celebration of the marriage. You don't only go and celebrate the marriage anywhere. You don't go to any church building and start celebrating the marriage. You don't go to any pastor's office and start celebrating the marriage. You don't go to any court premises and start celebrating the marriage. You have to celebrate the marriage at a place that is licensed for that purpose. It's a licensed place of worship, or the office of the marriage officer or registrar of marriage. So there are two places you can actually have a valid celebration of marriage. The first place is a licensed place of worship. Now, these places are licensed by the district assemblies or the MCEs. They license places that are supposed to be used for celebration of marriages. They are oftentimes places of worship. There are some recreational facilities that are also licensed to be used to celebrate marriages. So be sure to ask whether or not the place is licensed for celebration of marriage. And you can also do the celebration in the office of the registrar of marriages as well. Oftentimes, those who go to the court to do it, you will do it at that place. And it is required that the door is left open and it happens within the particular period of time. It is not something that's supposed to be done in darkness or in closed doors. Okay, so the next one is, which is the last one for you to be sure your marriage is valid, that is, your ordinance marriage is valid, is that it must be clearly established that there is no lawful impediment to the two of you getting married. What does lawful impediment they refer to? Refers to anything that could obstruct a lawful marriage. Maybe one of you is already married under the customary law to another person who is not the one he or she wants to marry now in the ordinance marriage. Then that becomes a lawful impediment. That cannot make the ordinance marriage valid. Because of that, the fact that you have an existing customary law marriage is a lawful impediment to you contracting the new ordinance marriage. So what it means is that for ordinance marriage, if we had a marriage before which is still subsisting or which is still valid, you cannot engage in the ordinance marriage. You need to dissolve that one before you can marry under the ordinance. Okay, so that's it about the ordinance marriage and the few things you need to know to ensure that it is valid. So just go to the list again. You can rewatch this video many times and be sure you get a list, and use that to measure your marriage, how it was celebrated, whether notice was given, whether bans were published, whether the minister who officiated it or the minister who actually supervised the celebration of marriage was licensed, and the place you did the marriage was also licensed. You need to check that and be sure everything is all right. So we talk about the last type of marriage now, which is the Islamic or Muhammadan marriage. This is a marriage that is celebrated often in accordance with the religious rules of the Muslims. You are required to fulfill certain requirements of the Quran. So that is very important. But there are a few things I need to know. What is the nature of marriages contracted under Muhammadan marriage? Number one is that they are polygamous in nature. Polygamy has two types. We have polygyny and we have polyandry. So polygyny talks about a man marrying more women, and polyandry talks about a woman marrying more men. In Ghana, the polyandry is prohibited in all forms. A woman is not permitted by law or custom to marry more men, but some customary rules and Islamic rules also permit a man to marry more women. For Islamic rules, the man can marry maximum of 4 women. That is permitted. So it's polygamous in nature. Once you are going for Islamic marriage or Muhammadan marriage, you know that the man has the capability to marry 4 women if he so desires. Then another thing you need to note is that for Muhammadan marriages, for it to be valid, it must of necessity be registered. If it is not registered, it won't be valid. So it must be registered as a Muhammadan marriage and required to register within 1 week after celebration of the marriage. You can always seek to extend the time to register it, but that is what the law says. You have exactly 1 week to ensure that it's registered as a Muhammadan marriage once it's celebrated. Without registration, it won't be valid as a Muhammadan marriage. So there are 4 essential elements that must be present in all Muhammadan marriages. Aside all the customary rites you may perform in accordance with the Quran, there are 4 requirements that must also be present. So the first one is that there must be a proposal on behalf of one of the parties. Somebody must propose, either he himself or on his behalf. You're right, the proposal can take place. Then there must be acceptance of the proposal. And we oftentimes would also add that the acceptance and the proposal must take place before witnesses and then at the same place. So these 4 essential elements are very important to have the Muhammadan marriage fully established. So there must be a proposal by the person himself or on behalf of the person. Then there must also be acceptance of the proposal, and both the acceptance and the proposal must happen at the same meeting or the same place, and it must be before witnesses. So once you meet all these requirements, you would have a valid Muhammadan marriage, aside the other requirement that may be imposed by Quran and all the customary rights that's applicable to Muhammadan marriages. So with these few pointers, I hope you can check your marriage and be sure that it's valid. You don't want anything to happen before you will know that your marriage was never valid all along, and then there will be issues for the children, your properties, and all of that. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to the channel, like our videos, share it to a friend, let someone knows about how marriages can be contracted validly in Ghana, and let them use this marriage validity checker to check their marriages. I am Godwin Selassie Dapo, and this is Make It Legal.